Hello there all, welcome to eosacro. This video is a part 1 of a two-part video tutorial on camera tracking in Nuke. In this first part, I'm going to cover the basics of automatic and user tracking within Nuke. Once you've completed this part, you should be able to handle most of the footages you get for tracking completely within Nuke. You will know all the options involved to get a better track. You will also know how to set up your scene orientation, scale, and finalize on your camera track. So let's get started. Let us first take a look at the footage we have before we actually get into tracking. So here I have this table with a couple of markers set on top of it. I've also placed a marker off the table to get some parallax. As you can see, the entire move is very jerky, the camera move, because it's a handheld camera. And also the entire frame range I have here is from 0 to 99. Now, this entire footage is not supposed to be auto track, it's supposed to be user tracks because of this markers, but I'm going to go ahead and do an auto track first to just show you what kind of results Nuke can give us. First off, to do any auto track, we need the camera tracker node. So let's go to the 3D drop down menu and choose the camera tracker. Most of the options we need for auto tracking are present right here in the camera tracker tab itself. What we first want to do is auto track all the features we want, which is this track features button. Once we have done the auto track, we do a solve for the camera to get the actual camera move. Once that is done, we can either use the direct output from the output tab, or we can make a camera or an entire scene. So it's all up to dependent on the kind of output that is required. So now first let's go ahead and do a simple auto track. I'll click on track features, and here in the viewport you should be able to see these orange crosshairs which are tracking different features within our footage and trying to know exactly where they're moving. And also you should be seeing these orange markers which are slipping a lot, and that's going to give us bad results, but I'll show you later how to solve them. Now, as you can see, most of these tracks right now are orange in color. Let me go ahead and hit solve camera. And after a second, you should be able to see that most of these turned green, and there are a few orange and red trackers too. Basically, what's Nuke trying to tell you is that it thinks green trackers are the ones which are the best, orange is what Nuke considers are not so good, and red are the ones that Nuke has rejected from the final track. So once we have this result, we can immediately know that this blue marker we have here on our original footage and the green marker we have here are supposed to be very good tracks, and even this blotch we have here, if we even go through it, these markers will actually sit through the whole way, but Nuke is considering them to be bad tracks. So that means we have a lot of slip and a lot of errors in all of the other tracks. We'll come back to all of them later. Now, to actually see the kind of results we have, let's go ahead and create an actual scene. I'll put my viewer off to the side here and click create scene. This gives me a point cloud which gives me all of these auto tracks in 3D positions, and this complete scene node, a 3D scene node, and a camera. So now let's go ahead and connect them into my viewer and see what kind of a result we have. Connect the scene and the camera tracker. I'll put them here in the viewport. Okay, I'll look at this entire scene through my actual camera, which is locked. Now if I go through and hit play, you should be able to see that most of these points don't actually stick, the grid is not aligned, and there's a lot of shake and a lot of slipping in all of these tracks. So this is not the best of the tracks we should be able to get. So now this was a very default auto track. Let's see what kind of options we have while doing an auto track in the next section. Now, to show you the different options while doing an auto track, let me go ahead and create a new camera tracker node. I'll connect that to the original read input I have here. And instead of going ahead and do track features like I did previously, let me go ahead and edit a few settings. So to edit any of these settings, I'll go into the tracking tab, and to see the kind of results I'm going to get after the edits, I'm going to turn on preview features. So by turning this on, you should be able to see these orange crosshairs in the viewport, which basically signify where the auto tracks are going to be placed. So now the first option I have here is the number of tracks, and by increasing this you can get many number of tracks, as many as you require. Next, we have detection threshold. Detection threshold basically means how much contrast a feature must have before it's considered. So let's understand that for a second. Here I have a pink marker. It's very bright, and compared to all of the background, it has a lot of contrast. You can immediately recognize it's there. Along with the pink marker, we also have its shadow. So the shadow and the marker both have a lot of contrast and easy to detect. Not only that, if I go into the red channel, you can see it's bright white compared to the dull gray color we have in the background. Similarly, if I go to green, it has a dark color, and compared to the light background, light gray, it still has contrast. Same thing with blue. It has white and light gray. But when it comes to blue, the shadow has more contrast than the object itself. So that is the contrast between different features. When you compare the table to these markers, they have a lot of contrast. So that's basically what detection threshold basically means. So if I go ahead and increase this, all the tracking markers are going to be placed only on objects or only on the pixels which have a lot of contrast between them. So I can go ahead and increase this if I know that there are a lot of features which can be properly tracked. If I know that there are not a lot of features, or if I want the tracks to be spread evenly, I can go ahead and decrease them. As you can see, they are spread quite evenly when I decrease them. Next, what we have is feature separation. Feature separation basically tells Nuke how much distance there should be between different features. So if I go ahead and start increasing this value, you can see that once a feature has been detected, the next feature has a lot of separation between them, and there are no tracking markers in between. So this makes sure that a lot of tracking markers are placed on proper features with a lot of contrast rather than low contrast regions. You can of course go ahead and decrease this, and this basically scatters your tracking markers everywhere in the scene. So it's totally up to you to set it to any value you need. I've gone ahead and set it to 20, so now I have a lot of tracking markers on my proper markers, and none where there are no actual markers. Now obviously I don't need 1,000 tracks, so I'm going to go ahead and decrease it to just 50. So as you can see, I have very low number of tracks this time. Also, there are a few more options which I can use before I go ahead and do track features. This top options which I was just tweaking here basically define how the features are selected, whereas the bottom options here define how the features are going to be tracked later. So the first option here is the minimum length. Minimum length basically tells Nuke how long a feature must last, or a feature must be tracked for it to be considered as a good feature or for it to be saved. So if I tell it to be 3, so if I am able to track, or if the computer is able to track something for just 3 frames, it's going to save it. So instead, if I go ahead and increase this value, it's going to last for longer. Now, how can I use it here? We know that these markers which are kept on this frame last from 0 to the 99th frame. So basically they exist throughout my entire sequence. So in such a case, there is no point for this minimum length to be so small, because all the features in my scene are supposed to last a very long time. So I can go ahead and increase this value to a very high one. So it basically makes sure that any track which is less than 40 frames is going to be deleted now. So that is the first option. Next, what we have is track threshold. This tells from frame to frame how much can a track change for it still to be a good track. If I come here to this blue marker, you can see that as it goes ahead, the actual shape changes. In the end here, we basically have a light blue with a very small amount of dark blue in this marker, whereas in the beginning it was just basically a big bunch of dark blue with light blue on the side. So the tracking marker can change a bit. So this signifies how much it can change per frame. So therefore it's going to go ahead and use this value. Next, we have tracking smoothness. This signifies how smooth the track has to be, especially on very bumpy footages. Apart from this, we have track consistency. This is quite useful if you have a very complicated shot. Try to change this value and see exactly what would give you the best results. Apart from this, the last option we have here is the free camera or rotating camera. rotating camera basically means that the camera is a nodal pan, meaning it does not move. If your camera moves, go ahead, set it to free camera. If it's not moving, you can set it to rotating camera. Basically, rotating camera shots do not have any parallax. Now, these are the basic settings I have set, and as you can see, I have a few tracking markers here. I'm going to go ahead and increase the detection threshold so that these tracking markers are there only on the objects with a lot of contrast, and also I'm going to increase the minimum track length to about a 60. Once I have these values in, I can go ahead to camera tracker and tell track features. Now, as it's tracking, you can see there are a few issues. The ping tracker on the top is changing so much that the track is going to be deleted quite often. So therefore, this track might not exist by the end of this footage. So as you can see, it's gone. So this basically means that when I'm trying to solve my footage, I'll not have this point which has a maximum parallax. So therefore, there needs to be something which I can do to make sure this track is utilized, and that is basically adding a seed. Right, you can right click in a footage and tell seed track. So that adds in a track of its own individually anywhere you place it. So you can add in any number of these seed tracks in any particular location. So once I've added these seed tracks, obviously I'll have to go and tell track features once more. And remember to make sure you put the seed tracks in the proper frame range, because without it, it's going to go ahead and start tracking it only from the point on you have put it. So I put it somewhere on the 80th frame, so therefore it's only visible in those frames. So I'm going to the first frame and again adding in a seed. So now let me go ahead track once more, and you can see it's going to be tracked and it's deleted already. So to make sure I get that pink marker, I can go ahead and try to increase this tracking threshold, decrease the tracking threshold, but it might not give me the best result. So instead, the best thing to do would be to actually add a user track. Now, there is a way better method to add a user track, but what I'm showing you right now is a very laborious, boring method, so you're free to ignore this method, but it's quite useful to know that too. So what I'm doing is going to tell Nuke that I want to add a user track, and Nuke gives me this bare dot here at the corner. I'm going to place this on my pink marker. I'm placing it here at the top corner. I'll go turn on this exposure compensation so that I can see the marker properly. I'll turn on animation keys on this marker. I'll go frame by frame, move the marker, and start keying it. So basically this is just like roto. I have to go every frame and make sure it's positioned in exactly the same position. And if you have a lot of features, you'll have to make sure you're doing this for a lot of frames. So let me just go ahead and not bore you. I'll pause the video and get back to you once I have finished doing all of this. Okay, that was some really boring work. Okay, so I went about and finished tracking 99 frames of this user track. As you can see, this user track is way different compared to other tracks. It shows you these keys and also the yellow circle. Yellow circles means user tracks, and pink circles I believe signify constraints, and white ones scales. I'm not sure, we'll be going through it later. Okay. So I've done this user track, and as you can see, I now have a track for the parallax point also. So once I have all of this, I can now go ahead and finally solve for my camera. But previously we have solved the camera, but the result we obtained was a very bad camera. Let me show you what I mean by that. If I go to the previous camera tracker and go to the solver tab, you can see that the camera is told to be an unknown constant, the focal length, and the film back size is the default one which Nuke comes with, and also there is no lens distortion parameter which has been enabled. So these are very important items to enable if you want to make sure your compositing comes out the best. So therefore what I'm going to do now is go ahead and put in these values. The camera I'm using for this footage was the Canon EOS 7D. So therefore I'll go ahead and put in the film back value for this camera, which is 22.3 millimeters cross 14.9 millimeters. Also the focal length I used was 28, but I'm not exactly sure, so I'm going to go ahead and directly just approximate constant it, because I remember I never changed the focal length, I just kept it constant. So those are the two options there. Apart from that, I want to make sure the keyframe is very accurate, so I want it to be a high detailed solve. I'll set that to high, and I want it to be a 3-frame initialization instead of 2 so that the result is much better. With these options on, I can also go to the lens tab and tell that there is a distortion in this lens, but I don't know the amount of distortion. Basically, this is lens distortion, and you can go on Google and search for it, and you'll get all the information you need. And I'm just going ahead and giving it the unknown lens value so that Nuke calculates the undistort values for me on its own. So once I have set these values, I can come out here back to the first tab, and I'll tell solve camera. So once I hit that, it'll take a few seconds, and it'll go ahead and solve and give me a result. And as you can see, I got these green points now, and if I move through, they stick quite well. And once I have this, I can actually create a scene and try to see exactly what result I have. Also, one thing to note, if I come back to the lens parameter, I can turn on undistort input, and this you can see is extending my footage, and this basically is trying to straighten out the edges of my table. You can see the table looks way straighter in the undistorted input rather than in the distorted one. So this is what Nuke does when I tell to fix the footage. So okay, I have that. Now coming back, I want to see exactly what kind of a result I have in a 3D scene. So to do that, I'll go ahead and tell create scene, and obviously Nuke goes ahead and recreates the same setup we had previously. So now I'll go ahead and combine them into a single view to see what result I have. So let me put this in another view. Scene, I'll put this on over with the camera tracker. So now I have this. I'll look through the camera, go back and hit play, and as you can see, all these tracks are actually sitting in. They are slipping, but not as much as they used to before. But first thing you notice is that the grid is not aligned properly. It is actually quite misaligned, and it looks like it's slipping, but it's not. We haven't actually ordered the scene up properly. So let's do that now. I'll go ahead, remove this option. I'll come out of the camera. Okay, and now as you can see, all the points here which are visible are on the table, and this one point which is on the top is the actual marker which we created, the pink marker. So basically what I want is all these points which are flat to be on the grid, and this one which is on the top to be going upwards. So all I have to do for that is go back to my camera tracker. I'll select all these points but deselect the top point, because these are the points I want at the bottom. You can see these points are selected. Now once I have these points selected, all I have to do is go ahead, right click on them and tell ground plane set to selected. Once I do that, if I come back to my 3D view, you can see all of these are flattened out. But another problem right now is that you can see these markers. Let me increase the size. You can see these markers here, the pink one, green, and the pink one here, the blue one at the back and the green one at the back. These markers are not actually aligned to the grid. The grid is completely differently aligned. So let me show you what I mean by that. Okay, so as you can see, the table has a different alignment at the back than the grid, whereas if I go ahead and play, the grid does match, but it's not aligned to the edge of the table. So I want it aligned properly. So to do this alignment, all I have to do is tell it which axis to choose. So I'll come back here to my camera tracking node, and with the option selected, I can go ahead, select any two tracks and tell which axis they fall on. So I've selected these two tracks and I want them to go on the x-axis. So I can go to ground plane and tell set x, and once I've done that, you should be able to see that the grid is aligned quite nicely. Okay, let me go ahead and undistort the input too, so that you can see that it's not aligned perfectly, but it is aligned quite well. Now if I go ahead and play, it does look like it's slipping. The main reason being it takes a bit of time to actually read in the input, so it's not as fast as it's supposed to be. So let it just pass through till 99 frames, and when it comes back you should be able to see what kind of a result we have. So as you can see, the grid fits in, the track is beautiful. We have added one single user track and a lot of auto tracks to get this result. So you've got this done till here, but now next step is creating a pure user track. So next time I'm going to show you exactly how you can go about and create an entire solve using only user tracks with only a few auto tracks, rather than doing this boring, laborious user track method which I've just shown you. So in this section, I'm going to talk about how to create some user tracks. Again, like previously, I'm going to get started by creating a simple camera tracker. So let me just arrange this out a bit. Create a camera tracker and connect that to my original input. Now, I have the camera tracker, and inside the camera tracker, under the tracking tab, we have user tracks. But when you create user tracks, you're left to create them manually without any aid from the computer. So the method I'm going to use is basically going to create trackers, normal 2D trackers, which are going to track and will be then transferred into the user track here. So how I'm going to do that is I'm going to create a normal tracker node. So this tracker is going to help me create all the user tracks I want. I'll just connect that to the original footage once more. Okay, so I have this connected. Now, with this connected, I can go ahead, add in any number of tracks and do some normal 2D tracking like you do in any other package, and then convert them to user tracks. So let's add in a few tracks. So I've added a single track and I can place it anywhere I want. As you can see, you have a few overlays here on the top. You can go ahead and edit them however you want. You have a dot here which lets you extend this how much ever you want. You can use the O key on your keyboard to disable these overlays. Now, let me go ahead and first track this pink marker we have at the top. I'll go reduce the size of this feature so that there is this pink marker in the center with a bit of the background in the surroundings. So with this selected, I can go ahead and tell track, and there is a simple shortcut for all of these. The first two here start with ZX and then CV. So basically these go about in the same order on your keyboard, so that's quite easy to track them using just your keyboard. So one thing to note, if I'm going to go ahead and track this marker, as you can see, it's tracking it. The problem is that this might sometimes go off frame. So for that, we have centering frame here at the top. So I'll turn that one on, so centered view. And now I can tell it to track. And as you can see, it goes about and tracks this easily, and it finishes tracking all of it. Instead of doing it all manually, it's a quite easy method of doing simple tracks. So I have this tracked. Similarly, I need to track all of these different markers which I have here. So let me go ahead, add all these markers in. This is the tracker number 2 for this. I can turn on this add tracker button so that I can just go ahead and keep adding tracks without having to click add track every single frame. So I'll click that 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So what I'm going to do now is select these tracks and edit their feature size so that they're proper. Keep them in the right place. So I'm just positioning them in the right way so that they're surrounding the entire marker. Obviously you're supposed to track one corner of them, but I'm just too lazy for that. So I'm just placing them as easy as they come. Okay. Placing simple user tracks everywhere. You have a lot of tracking options, like you can go into the settings and change all these options, just like in Bojo or PF track. You have different options for how the track has to be completed. You also have some options here right here at the top, the basic options you need to use, but I'm not going too deep into user tracks. You can pretty much go through all of this in the Nuke documentation, so I'm skipping all of those. So let me just place these out now. Okay, so these are pretty much placed out. All I'm going to do is select these tracks. So you can see I've selected all these tracks, and here I have option to track all of them who are selected. I can go ahead, tell track to the end, and as you can see, all of them are being tracked at the same time at one shot. So that's pretty neat. So I'm just letting it track out once. Let me pause the video till it's done and I'll get back to you. Okay, so it took less than a minute to do all of these tracks, and if I select any of these tracks over here at the top, you should be able to see that these tracks are pretty beautiful. They are done neat and awesome. So that pretty much does my user track. Now, once I have my user track, how exactly do I transfer it from this tracker node into the camera tracker node? So let's see exactly how that can be done. Now, what I'll do is go into the camera tracker node, and let's look at the number of tracks we have here. We have 7 tracks, so I need to create 7 tracks in here too. So I'll just go ahead and click this till I have track number 7. I don't need 8, I don't need 0, so I have 7 tracks with the proper names. Now what I will do is go ahead and select the track name. I'll shift click on the curve here and drag it into the curve on this side. Now there are differences when you click use these options. When you use the shift button, you're actually copying the animation itself. So in this camera tracker now, if I go to the curve editor, you should be able to see that these are keyframes. These are not actual curves or expressions, but actual keyframes which are being used. And also you should be able to see that in the viewport you have that same user track we had before. Now instead, let's say I went about and directly control click and dragged it into this user track here. You can see the options this time are not actually dark blue in color or bright blue, they're dull blue. So this means it's an actual expression. I can go till edit expression and you can see it's going to the tracker track to track values. So if I go to the curve editor for this, you should be able to see that this is the track, okay, user track 2. And this time we have expression, because of which we don't have any keyframes, and that also means that if I come out, we don't actually have any keyframes to edit. You can see there is no yellow circle like we had before, so you should not be doing this work, right? So let me go ahead and we have user track, generate, and it's going to go generate keyframes throughout, and now we have the proper one. So basically I went about generated it, so now if I go to the edit expression, you should see it's a curve, so therefore I just got rid of it. Now I have to go ahead and just shift click and drag them correspondingly to each track. So I'm going ahead and just adding them in. Okay, so 7 tracks to 7 user tracks. As you can see, all of these have been transferred as keyframes only, X and Y values. So now in the node graph, you should be able to see the camera tracker has animation on top of it. Now, I have these user tracks added, and as you can see there are 7 of them. But if I come to the camera tracker, for some reason sometimes I don't really get the solve camera option enabled. Probably I do get it if I add in a lot more user tracks, but usually I never get to. So what I usually tend to do is I just do a simple auto track with a few number of keyframes with some very basic elements so that I can get a proper track. So let me go ahead and just add in a few of these. Oops. And it's a negative, so I need to go make it positive. Okay, so make sure it's over 60, and camera tracker track feature. So as you can see, this time I have my user tracks already, and now I'm adding my auto tracks also, so it's going to give me a pretty neat solve. So let it finish, and once it's finished, I'll just go ahead, set in a couple of options for the solver and the lens, and once it's done, we are pretty much done with the whole thing. So we are just going to go set this to approximate constant. I'm going to plug in the values for my camera, and this is the 28, and also I'm going to tell there is supposed to be about 0.05 amount of smoothness in the camera movement, high camera accuracy, and now I'll go tell I have an unknown lens distortion, and now I can tell solve for the camera. It should take a minute, and as you can see, pretty much all the points are green, and I basically have a pretty good solve this time. I can go to the lens parameter, tell undistort input, and that should give me any undistorted values. So as you can see, it undistorted the footage. It's a pretty neat one because this is usually the size I get to when I undistort the footage. So now I have the entire thing done. All I have to now do is put in some constraints for the grid and the size, so I'm completely done. So the way I'm going to do that is select all these tracks. I'm going to deselect the track here at the top, and I can tell ground plane set to selected. Apart from that, I'm going to select 2 track points here, and I'm going to tell that they are the x-axis for the whole scene. So I'm going to set x. Apart from this, these 2 points which are present here are basically 15 centimeters apart in the setup I had done. So I'm going to go ahead and set that up. So I'm going to go right click on them. I'll go to scene and add scale distance. By clicking on that, you can see there is this distance 0 marker which is present between 2 of these, and I can go to the scene tab, and here at the bottom I have a scale constraint enabled now. All I have to tell is what is the distance between these 2 trackers, and I know it's 15 centimeters, 15 to 16, so I'll set it to 15. And when I do that, you can see the uniform scale of the entire scene is scaled up to make sure it matches that distance. So now I have a completely organized proper track, and it's a beautiful track. So let's go see the actual results. I'll go ahead, tell create scene. So I have this whole scene created. I'll plug these in to my viewer. So now my scene here, camera track there. I'll look through the camera, lock it, go back and hit play. And as you can see, these markers line up, and usually user tracks come out black in color, so don't really worry about them too much. These other tracks are usually white or the color of the background. And as you can see, it's giving me a pretty neat track, and this is almost done. I can put any 3D object into the scene now, and it would look like it's actually there in the scene. So that's it, done. And one thing for those of you who are worried, the edge of this grid is not aligned because these 2 markers are not exactly perpendicular to the edge of that table. So if you just want to change that, you can go to the grid and you can actually change the angle of the grid itself to make sure you can align that there too. So that's it for part 1. In this video, I have covered basics of auto tracking and user tracking within Nuke. In part 2, I'll continue on and show you how I track the face, generate some point cloud, mesh, project textures, and finish the composite. If you have any critiques, suggestions, or doubts after having watched this video, you can put them in the comments under this video, and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Also, if you find my free tutorials useful, please consider backing me up by purchasing a few of my paid tutorials, which will go a long way in helping me. So that ends this entire video tutorial. I really hope you found this part 1 useful, and I'll see you in part 2.